Marshal Ferdinand Foch was a French soldier, military theorist and the Allied Généralissime during the First World War. At the outbreak of war in August 1914, Foch's 20th Corps participated in the brief invasion of Germany before retiring in the face of a German counter-attack and successfully blocking the Germans short of Nancy. Ordered west to defend Paris, Foch's prestige soared as a result of the victory at the Marne, for which he was widely credited as a chief protagonist while commanding the French Ninth Army. He was then promoted again to command Army Group North, in which role he was required to cooperate with the British forces at Ypres and the Somme. At the end of 1916, partly owing to the disappointing results of the latter offensive and partly owing to wartime political rivalries, Foch was removed from command. Recalled as Chief of the General Staff in 1917, Foch was ultimately appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Allied armies in the spring of 1918. He played a decisive role in halting a renewed German advance on Paris in the Second Battle of the Marne, after which he was promoted to Marshal of France. Addington says, to a large extent the final Allied strategy which won the war on land in Western Europe in 1918 was Foch's alone. On the 11th of November 1918, Foch accepted the German request for an armistice. Foch advocated peace terms that would make Germany unable to pose a threat to France ever again, but was overruled by French Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau. After the Treaty of Versailles, signed on 28 June 1919, exactly 5 years after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, Foch declared, due to France not being allowed to annex the Rhineland or occupy the area for a period of 30 years, this is not a peace, it is an armistice for 20 years. His words proved prophetic. The Second World War started 20 years and 64 days later. Early life. Foch was born at Tarbes, Hautes-Pyrénées, the son of a civil servant from Comminges. He attended school at Tarbes, Rodez and the Jesuit college at Saint-Étienne. His brother later became a Jesuit priest, which may initially have hindered Foch's rise through the ranks of the French army since the Republican government of France was anti-clerical. Foch enlisted in the French 4th Marine Infantry Regiment in 1870, during the Franco-Prussian War, and decided to stay in the army after the war. In 1871, he entered the École Polytechnique and, in 1873, received his commission as a lieutenant in the 24th Artillery Regiment. Despite not having the time to complete his course due to the shortage of junior officers, he was promoted through the ranks, eventually becoming a captain, before entering the Staff College in 1885. In 1895 he returned to college as an instructor, and it is for his work there that he was later acclaimed as the most original military thinker of his generation. Turning to history for inspiration, Foch became known for his critical analyses of the Franco-Prussian and Napoleonic campaigns and of their relevance to the pursuit of military operations in the new century. His re-examination of France's painful defeat in 1870 was among the first of its kind. During his time as an instructor, Foch created renewed interest in French military history, inspired confidence in a new class of French officers, and brought about the intellectual and moral regeneration of the French army. His thinking on military doctrine was shaped by the Clausewitzian philosophy, then uncommon in France, that the will to conquer is the first condition of victory. Collections of his lectures, which reintroduced the concept of the offensive to French military theory, were published in the volumes Des Principes de la Guerre in 1903, and De la Conduite de la Guerre in 1904. While Foch advised qualification and discernment in military strategy and cautioned that recklessness in attack could lead to prohibitive losses and ultimate failure, his concepts, distorted and misunderstood by contemporaries, became associated with the extreme offensive doctrines of his successors. The cult of the offensive came to dominate military circles. That Foch's books were cited in the development of Plan 17, the disastrous offensive that brought France close to ruin in 1914, proved particularly damaging to his reputation. Foch continued his initially slow rise through the ranks, being promoted to lieutenant colonel in 1898. Thereafter, his career accelerated and he returned to command in 1901, when he was posted to a regiment. He was promoted colonel in 1903. After a short time spent as deputy chief of the general staff, he was appointed commandant of the École Militaire, then brigadier general in 1907, returning to the staff college as commandant from 1907 to 1911. In 1911 he was promoted to Général de Division and then in 1913 took command of the French 20th Corps at Nancy. He had held this appointment for exactly 1 year when he led the 20th Corps into battle. Foch was seen as a master of the Napoleonic school of military thought, but he was the only one of the military college commandants still serving. Their doctrines had been challenged, not only by the German school, but also since about 1911 by a new French school inspired by General L'Assaut de Grande Maison, which criticized them as lacking in vigor and offensive spirit, and contributing to needless dispersion of force. The French army fought under the new doctrines, but they failed in the first battles of August 1914, and it remained to be seen whether the Napoleonic doctrine would hold its own, would give way to doctrines evolved during the war, or would incorporate the new moral and technical elements into a new outward form within which the spirit of Napoleon remained unaltered. The war gave an ambiguous answer to these questions, which remained a source of controversy amongst experts. Foch influenced General Joseph Joffre when he drafted the French plan of campaign in 1913. World War I. 1914. On the outbreak of the war, Foch was in command of 20th Corps, part of the Second Army of General de Castelnau. On 14 August the Corps advanced towards the Sarrebourg-Morhange line, taking heavy casualties in the Battle of the Frontiers. The defeat of the French 15th Corps to its right forced Foch into retreat. Foch acquitted himself well, covering the withdrawal to Nancy and the Charmes Gap before launching a counter-attack that prevented the Germans from crossing the River Morthe. Foch was then selected to command the newly formed Ninth Army during the First Battle of the Marne with Maxime Weygand as his chief of staff. Only a week after taking command, with the whole French army in full retreat, he was forced to fight a series of defensive actions to prevent a German breakthrough. During the advance at the marshes at Saint-Gond he is said to have declared, "My center is yielding. My right is retreating. Situation excellent. I am attacking." These words were seen as a symbol both of Foch's leadership and of French determination to resist the invader at any cost. Although there is little evidence that the signal was sent, Foch's counter-attack was an implementation of the theories he had developed during his staff college days and succeeded in stopping the German advance. Foch received further reinforcements from the Fifth Army and, following another attack on his forces, counter-attacked again on the Marne. The Germans dug in before eventually retreating. On 12 September, Foch regained the Marne at Chalons and liberated the city. The people of Chalons greeted as a hero the man widely believed to have been instrumental in stopping the retreat and stabilizing the Allied position. Receiving thanks from the Bishop of Chalons, Foch piously replied, "Non nobis Domini, non nobis, sed nomina tuo da gloriam." Foch's successes gained him a further promotion on 4 October, when he was appointed Assistant Commander-in-Chief with responsibility for coordinating the activities of the northern French armies and liaising with the British forces. This was a key appointment as the race to the sea was then in progress. Joseph Joffre, Commander-in-Chief of the French army, had also wanted to nominate Foch as his successor, in case of accident, to make sure the job would not be given to Joseph Gallieni, but the French government would not agree to this. When the Germans attacked on the 13th of October, they narrowly failed to break through the British and French lines. They tried again at the end of the month during the First Battle of Ypres, this time suffering terrible casualties. Foch had again succeeded in coordinating a defense and winning against the odds. Field Marshal John French, the commander of the British Expeditionary Force, had described Foch in August 1914 to J.E.B. Seeley, a liaison officer, as the sort of man with whom I know I can get on, and later in February 1915 described him to Lord Selborne as the best general in the world. By contrast, William Robertson, another British officer, thought that Foch was rather a flat catcher, a mere professor, and very talkative. On the 2nd of December 1914, King George V appointed him an honorary Knight Grand Cross of the Order of the Bath. 1915–16 in 1915, his responsibilities by now crystallized in command of the Northern Army Group. He conducted the Artois Offensive and, in 1916, the French effort at the Battle of the Somme. He was strongly criticized for his tactics and the heavy casualties that were suffered by the Allied armies during these battles, and in December 1916 was removed from command by Joffre and sent to command Allied units on the Italian front. Joffre was himself sacked days later. 1917, just a few months later, after the failure of General Robert Nivelle's offensive, General Philippe Pétain, the hero of Verdun, was appointed Chief of the General Staff. Foch hoped to succeed Pétain in command of Army Group Centre, but this job was instead given to General Fayolle. The following month, Pétain was appointed Commander-in-Chief in place of Nivelle, and Foch was recalled and promoted to Chief of the General Staff. Like Pétain, Foch favored only limited attacks until the Americans were able to send large numbers of troops to France. Outside of the Western Front, Foch opposed Lloyd George's plans to send British and French troops to help Italy take Trieste, but was open to the suggestion of sending heavy guns. The Anglo-French leadership agreed in early September to send 100 heavy guns to Italy, 50 of them from the French army on Haig's left, rather than the 300 which Lloyd George wanted. As the guns reached Italy, Cadorna called off his offensive. Until the end of 1916, the French under Joffre had been the dominant Allied army. After 1917, this was no longer the case. Due to the vast number of casualties France's armies had suffered in the now 3.5-year-old struggle with Germany, the Supreme War Council was formally established on 7 November 1917, containing the Prime Minister and a minister from each of the Western Front powers, to meet at least once a month. Foch were appointed military representatives, to whom the general staffs of each country were to submit their plans. The French tried to have Foch as representative to increase their control over the Western Front. Clemenceau was eventually persuaded to appoint Foch's protégé Weygand instead, although many already suspected that Foch would eventually become Allied Generalissimo. Late in 1917, Foch would have liked to have seen Haig replaced as Commander-in-Chief of the BEF by Herbert Plumer. However, Haig would remain in command of the BEF for the remainder of the war. 1918 In January 1918, in accordance with Lloyd George's wishes, an executive board was set up to control the planned Allied General Reserve, with Clemenceau's agreement being obtained by having Foch on the board rather than Maxime Weygand. Pétain agreed to release only 8 French divisions and made a bilateral agreement with Haig, who was reluctant to release any divisions at all, to assist one another. The situation was worsened by Clemenceau's and Pétain's dislike of Foch. At a Supreme War Council meeting in London, with the German offensive clearly imminent, Foch agreed under protest to shelve the Allied reserve for the time being. On the evening of 24 March, after the German offensive was threatening to split apart the British and French forces, Foch telegraphed Wilson, asking what he thought of situation, and "We are of one mind that someone must catch a hold or we shall be beaten." Wilson reached France the following lunchtime. Pétain had sent a dozen divisions to plug the gap, and it is unclear that a committee would actually have acted any faster during the immediate crisis. At the Doullens Conference and at Beauvais, Foch was given the job of coordinating the activities of the Allied armies, forming a common reserve and using these divisions to guard the junction of the French and British armies and to plug the potentially fatal gap that would have followed a German breakthrough in the British Fifth Army sector. At a later conference he was given the title Supreme Commander of the Allied armies with the title of Generalissime. In May 1918, in the fifth session of the Supreme War Council, Foch was given authority over the Italian front. Foch was surprised by the German offensive on the Chemin des Dames. Foch believed it was a diversion to draw Allied reserves away from Flanders. This was partly true, although the planned German Flanders offensive never took place. The Allied armies under Foch's command ultimately held the advance of the German forces. The celebrated phrase, "I will fight in front of Paris, I will fight in Paris, I will fight behind Paris," attributed both to Foch and Clemenceau, illustrated the Generalissime's resolve to keep the Allied armies intact, even at the risk of losing the capital. At the sixth session of the Supreme War Council on 1 June, Foch complained that the BEF was still shrinking in size and infuriated Lloyd George by implying that the British government was withholding manpower. At a major Allied conference at Beauvais, Lord Milner agreed with Clemenceau that Foch should have the power to order all Allied troops as he saw fit, over the protests of Haig, who argued that it would reduce his power to safeguard the interests of the British Army. The British were disappointed that Foch operated through his own staff rather than through the permanent military representatives at Versailles, and on the 11th of July 1918 British ministers resolved to remind Foch that he was an Allied, and not a French, commander-in-chief. The Allies counterattacked at the Second Battle of the Marne in July 1918. On 6 August 1918, Foch was made a Marshal of France. Along with the British commander Field Marshal Douglas Haig, Foch planned the Grand Offensive, opening on 26 September 1918, which led to the defeat of Germany. After the war, he claimed to have defeated Germany by smoking his pipe. An unintended consequence of Foch's appointment was that he sheltered Haig from British political interference. Before the armistice and after the armistice, a villagista, Foch controlled all the operations against Germany, including a planned invasion from Italy into Bavaria. Foch accepted the German cessation of hostilities in November from the German delegate Matthias Erzberger. On the day of the armistice, he was elected to the Académie des Sciences. 10 days later, he was unanimously elected to the Académie Française. He received many honors and decorations from Allied governments. Assessments. In the euphoria of victory, Foch was regularly compared to Napoleon and Julius Caesar. However, historians took a less sanguine view of Foch's talents as commander, particularly as the idea took root that his military doctrines had set the stage for the futile and costly offensives of 1914, in which French armies suffered devastating losses. Supporters and critics continue to debate Foch's strategy and instincts as a commander, as well as his exact contributions to the Marne miracle. Foch's counterattacks at the Marne generally failed, but his sector resisted determined German attacks while holding the pivot on which the neighboring French and British forces depended in rolling back the German line. Foch's pre-war contributions as military theorist and lecturer have also been recognized, and he has been credited as the most original and subtle mind in the French army of the early 20th century. Paris Peace Conference. In January 1919, at the Paris Peace Conference, Foch presented a memorandum to the Allied plenipotentiaries in which he stated, "Henceforward the Rhine ought to be the western military frontier of the German countries. Henceforward Germany ought to be deprived of all entrance and assembling ground, that is, of all territorial sovereignty on the left bank of the river, that is, of all facilities for invading quickly, as in 1914, Belgium, Luxembourg, for reaching the coast of the North Sea and threatening the United Kingdom, for outflanking the natural defences of France, the Rhine, Meuse, conquering the northern provinces and entering the Parisian area. In a subsequent memorandum, Foch argued that the Allies should take full advantage of their victory by permanently weakening German power in order to prevent her from threatening France again. What the people of Germany fear the most is a renewal of hostilities, since, this time, Germany would be the field of battle and the scene of the consequent devastation. This makes it impossible for the yet unstable German government to reject any demand on our part if it is clearly formulated. The Entente, in its present favorable military situation, can obtain acceptance of any peace conditions it may put forward provided that they are presented without much delay. All it has to do is to decide what they shall be. However, the British Prime Minister David Lloyd George and the American President Woodrow Wilson objected to the detachment of the Rhineland from Germany, but agreed to Allied military occupation for 15 years, which Foch thought insufficient to protect France. Foch considered the Treaty of Versailles to be a capitulation, a treason, because he believed that only permanent occupation of the Rhineland would grant France sufficient security against a revival of German aggression. As the treaty was being signed, Foch said, "This is not peace. It is an armistice for 20 years.